And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Psychology is a scientific discipline with many different areas of application. Clinical psychology is a field of practice that deals with human functioning, either human problems and their solution, as well as promotion of physical, mental, and social well-being. On today's Open Connection, clinical psychologist Dr. Jennifer Mervyn.
Ancestrally, I've got my dad's family is from the Red River settlement area, a Métis on his side, and my mom's roots are European. But I grew up in British Columbia my whole life in North Delta, and I am a mom of 3 children, 14, 12, and 10 years old.
When you were like 6 years old, you go, okay, I'm going to be a psychologist.
No, when I was 6, I really wanted to be a lawyer for actually the longest time. My heart was set because I really believed in sort of fighting for issues around social justice, and I thought law might be my way to do it. I had my best girlfriend in grade 8 question if I could be a good person and be a lawyer, and my career actually route trajectory really changed. And I'm so glad I did, because I'm so happy with what I've chosen.
Did you find schooling that difficult, or?
I liked school. I excelled in school when I was young, so that piece wasn't challenging for me. But finding, I think, professors and research supervisors that would really allow me to have the freedom to be able to do what I wanted and what I found meaningful was, I think, somewhat challenging. And when I did, it was great. I had a wonderful, especially for my PhD, I had a wonderful dissertation supervisor who was Indigenous. And so he allowed me a lot of autonomy to be able to pursue what I wanted rather than fitting into someone else's sort of research. Being
Indigenous, coming from that mindset, you had to kind of adapt it away from a colonial model, right?
Absolutely, and that's like the coolest part of my work now is looking at how we decolonize health and wellness, but especially psychology and counseling. That's been like my heart's work and passion in what I do.
What are those things that we kind of, I guess, don't realize that is almost, decolonizing, I guess you could say?
Well, I mean, some of the basics that we don't even consider is like our spaces and places where we offer counseling. So we might have people in mental health that really want to help sort of, decolonize the ways within which we engage with people, but even our spaces and places, like having people come to government buildings or even offices, doing counseling and talking one-on-one in that kind of format and setting is a super colonial kind of construct and not necessarily how we would originally seek out connection and healing in community. I looked at young women who actually were successful at exiting out of street life. So I looked at their stories of strength and resilience and what it took to sort of make those exits. So not only on individual level, but really looking at the system's gaps and challenges that they had to overcome to be able to do that.
Why did you choose that one as a subject matter?
Definitely it connected with myself and my own personal story. So myself and my 3 sisters were all on the streets as young people, and we struggled, our home really struggled with mental health and addictions issues growing up, and so we found ourselves in some tough places as young people. And I often got asked, like, how did you get to where you are? And I thought it was a valuable question because I think everyone's path and route out of those dark spaces is so different. So I thought, let's learn from some of the amazing women who have exited and the different and diverse stories and see what we can learn from those to be able to help support others. A young woman who begged to go back into jail so she could get well and find recovery. A young woman who was very significantly mentally ill and had to get well before she was able to find healing. Really different and diverse stories. They're incredible. I keep in touch with most of them to this day.
I guess it's safe to say that you have a soft spot for those that are facing difficult times.
I think so. I think as a young person, I've definitely had a heart for our vulnerable, and that's why I was always really interested in social justice. And I see it alive and well in my own children from small ages, who they befriend and who they support. and who they want to support in their classrooms and community. And it's definitely, I think, in our blood somehow.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Clinical psychologists provide services to individuals, couples, and families across the lifespan and populations from all ethnic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. The problems or needs addressed range from minor adjustment issues to serious mental health problems. Let us return to the conversation as Dr. Mervyn shares some of her work experiences.
I started working right out of my undergrad, and I worked all the way through my master's in inpatient psychiatric care. And then finishing my master's, I got probably the best training ground of a job that I ever could have wished for. But I worked in the emergency rooms for about 10 years. So I carried a pager. Back in the day, we had these things called pagers, and I was on call to the 4 hospital emergency rooms and community settings for youth and mental health crisis. And I would do their assessment and follow-up crisis counseling sessions if they weren't admitted to hospital in the community. And I learned so much about how to do a fulsome assessment and make a diagnosis and then develop a robust treatment plan. And honestly, it was the best doing that for 10 years. I loved that work. And I really enjoyed crisis because I found that I could handle it actually quite well. It was interesting. All those years of hooliganism prepared me well for being able to handle tough topics and issues and provide safe space without feeling very rattled by kids who are really facing some pretty serious stuff. So it was meaningful work. I really, really loved that. And went on from there to work in government for the Ministry of Children and Family Development, as a consultant after I was a clinician, and then eventually I got seconded into some work provincially with Doctors of BC and looking at how to make some meaningful changes to transforming our child and youth mental health and substance use system.
I can make a change up in the higher level of, I guess, thinking and then see it work its way down.
I love frontline work. I still do to this day. I was never a team leader with mental health. I really, really loved working with people. I still do. I enjoy my sessions so very, very deeply. But doing that without looking at being able to make differences sort of macro level that really transform our systems, you'd feel a little bit helpless and hopeless and lost. So I think trying to pair those pieces of things for me. So I always sort of have my hand in helping influence policy and government and what's going in our different systems of care, and also involving young people and people with lived experience in those, so that they have their own voice. They're the ones out there experiencing it now, and it's very different than when I was out there as a young person. I mean, so much has changed. So I think making sure that I keep a balance in my practice of both of those pieces is really important for me. So I do a lot of teaching and training. I work with training police and RCMP, with education and educators, school boards, school systems and districts, administrators, frontline workers. Just across the board, the different systems of care. And then healthcare, I do a lot of work with physicians and healthcare professionals to help teach them and see how they can make their practices a little bit more culturally informed, a little bit more safe, and thinking about, like we were talking about, those vulnerable people who are really still struggling and the system doesn't really do a whole lot of good for. In fact, it often does a whole lot of harm.
Came up here a little while back and you were invited to talk to a group of people. Tell me a little bit about that.
I was invited to come up and see if we could work with local politics and business people, community people who were maybe facing issues of homelessness and substance use, and how we could really, I think, bridge the chasm between those groups that seem to be experiencing a lot of conflict and a lot of hurt and a lot of anger at that time. And so I came up to talk a little bit about the neuroscience of trauma and resilience. So just really, I believe that if we understand how people's brains work in the wake of trauma, especially colonization, residential school history, if we can understand the impacts aren't just necessarily a choice of being homeless or struggling with substances or mental health issues, but that really there's actually neurological pre-programming, our wiring that gets impacted by those experiences, especially when we're young, then I really believe that people will develop a heart of compassion and understanding and maybe look at things from a different perspective. And that was my hope in coming up to Terrace last, and it was great. We did a few different public events where we invited people to come and learn about how the brain works and talk about neuroscience and how to promote resilience in the community.
So it's safe to say that you're a geek is what it is.
I do love the brain. I do love how it works. And yeah, I do. I kind of nerd out on like the neuroscience of things. If you look at how amazing it is and how we have the hope of neuroplasticity, that our brains can change until the very day we die. Like we have the opportunity to change who we are and how we function neurologically. That's pretty incredible.
And of course, one of those things is there are times when the body or the brain says, I don't know, I'm missing something. And I guess that's where medicine can come in and help those who have a chemical imbalance kind of in the brain, right?
There's lots of different paths, I think, to wellness and healing, and each one plays a role, right? And so it's looking at how we work together, though, collaboratively across these different, like involving medicine and education and, our different areas that are supposed to be promoting wellness. We need to work better together if we're going to really help support someone in their change process.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Peer support is peers helping peers. It is based on the belief that those who have experienced challenges can provide support, encouragement, hope, and mentorship to others facing similar situations, encouraging them to continue their healing. Let us return the conversation as Dr. Mervyn shares the importance of peer support models.
Looking at how we make sustainable changes in our thinking or in our behavior, and there's so many different therapies that lead to that. And not everybody needs therapy. I don't believe that everybody needs a psychologist, everyone who's struggling. I mean, there's so many different paths to wellness and healing. But I do really believe in one thing, and that's that, and it's been proven in terms of the neuroscience of it, that even when we have some of those sustainable changes achieved, unless we attach purpose or meaning, unless we give people opportunities to contribute and be a part of that, usually the change doesn't stick around for too long. So you're telling me a little bit about like the local community here developing peer support models and having them come together and come up with ideas on what will benefit. And that day where they went out and picked up trash, that is like the example that proves what I believe in terms of the neuroscience. So the only way to really find meaningful, sustainable change is if we attach purpose and meaning to some of the trauma that we've been through. And so you need to be a part of something that connects us and unites us with other people, something that's bigger than ourselves, and that we feel like we have agency and opportunities to contribute to something and give back to something. That's where like meaningful change tends to really happen.
It makes sense when it comes to those New Year's resolutions where I'm going to do this, and then after 2 months you go, yeah.
It's so very true. I'm going to start a walking group, and your walking group meets for 2 months, and then everyone's busy and you don't have a walking group anymore. But if that walking group met for something that like was purposeful or meaningful, or you were giving back, or you were contributing, or you were bringing on new members that were just starting their New Year's resolutions, there's the potential for it to be a lot more sustainable in the long run.
There's a gap, there seems to be, in everyone's lifetime now. And we call that COVID because we can't seem to remember what we did before or at the beginning or at the end, right?
Yeah. And our sense of time is warped as a result of COVID. Yeah. And we reference things before COVID or after COVID.
You see the impacts of coming out of COVID in people that you meet or even at workspaces.
Our brains typically do function best when we're connected with other people. Like, we really do. I think there's been some literature that looked at like Zen state, and we think of like that solo surfer or skier, and they're in their like best brain state ever when they're focused and they're in themselves. And actually, I think the Stanford School of Medicine did a little bit of work around this when we've actually looked at our best creativity and brain productivity is actually not when we're by ourselves on that ski hill or even on that wave, but it's when we're connected to other people. And so having such an extended period of time when we weren't able to connect with other people and feel those connections. And some of us were so much harder hit than others, right? If we lived in families or in connected spaces. But those who didn't really, they're still feeling the impacts of what it's like. And just like with anything, you avoid something for long enough, it's really hard to get back out there and re-engage and be connected again. So we're seeing that, like schools and different organizations are trying so hard to promote these pro-social activities for youth and elderly, and they're having a hard time getting their numbers, getting people back out there. It's slow.
We do live in the Lower Mainland, so it's a little different there when it comes to the First Nations communities. Have you seen the impacts of COVID on the First Nations communities down there also?
I have absolutely seen the impacts of COVID. It has been, especially one of the big pieces is grief and loss. Not being able to gather, having people, even just here, I was up here for a ceremony and they talked about the impacts of only allowing 50 people for a memorial at a time and other people waiting outside, and it being hard to be able to not be a part of that process, to be able to really pay your respects and be a part of things in terms of grieving. But I see in terms of just people not being necessarily as connected, right, as social. Groups of people have changed in terms of how they connect and when they connect. I think we still have a long way to like rebound from COVID. We do, like there's opportunities there, but people aren't taking them because it's hard. It's been anxiety provoking and creating, COVID for people. And so we're still seeing sort of the aftermath of that anxiety that's been created as a result.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Nature is more than just landscape, more than just the backdrop of a holiday. Nature is therapy. It's been shown that time spent in nature is an antidote for stress. It calms the fight or flight impulses, can lower blood pressure, and can even elevate your self-esteem. In this final segment of Open Connection, Dr. Mervyn shares where her counseling sessions occur.
Doing wellness journeys, hiking, walking, horseback, camping, sailboats, boating, being on the water, paddleboarding, canoeing. We try to do it all to just get people out of urban environments and into our forests and on our shorelines and be out there with nature. That's one of my biggest pieces of trying to decolonize my practice is to not do. I think for the most part, especially when I'm on lands, working with the First Nations community that I'm most connected to, for the most part, 90% of my sessions are not done in a counseling office or a building at all. Go for walks, meet for food, meet at people's homes, but I'm not doing a lot of like inside space counseling as much as possible. I'm doing lands-based medicine and therapy. And it is incredible, right? I mean, we see the benefits of nature. After 2 minutes in nature, you'll have a decrease in your stress hormones, decrease in your heart rate, decrease in muscle tension after 2 minutes. And after 2 consecutive days, if you can be out in nature, go camping this summer. It's like so good for us. But you see like the incredible results in terms of like cancer fighting white blood cells. Like it's incredible what our bodies and brains do in response to connecting with the land. And it's so incredibly grounding for anyone who has a history of trauma to be out there and put your feet in the water or the sand or the soil or the grass and smell the smells and really just be present in the moment, engaging all 5 senses out there. I smudge regularly, and so I have to have the teaching of we release our smudge medicines into the water. And so I regularly have to walk down there and empty my I keep my old smudge medicines in a silver bowl, and my son and I will walk down and we will say a prayer and release them into the water. And just being out there in that salty air and the smells that come along with it, and your feet, even with shoes on, but it's even better if you take your shoes off. But we have like a pebbly beach before it gets to sand, and it's so grounding for me. The road to healing looks very different for everybody, because it's wonderful that we're destigmatizing mental health and more people are coming for counseling and therapy. But I guess the message I would want people to understand is that not everybody can afford therapy. Not everybody necessarily needs formal therapy or, you know, if you have access to it, that is great and a blessing. And First Nations Health Authority has wonderful access now to a great roster of people providing services. But there's so much that we can do, you know, outside of that for ourselves. You know, some of the very, very basic building blocks of our health and well-being is, you know, the basics in terms of how to live a healthy lifestyle. So sleep, making sure that we get off our screens and get enough sleep. You know, having a regular schedule and routine for sleep, going to bed at a good hour, waking up with the natural sun's, you know, light cycles, that kind of stuff can be huge for our health and well-being. Eating healthy, making sure we're not eating too much sugar and processed foods, having a balanced diet and feeding our brain well. I really, really believe in that. And then things like exercise. Like there's so many studies that show 3 30-minute times of exercise in our week is equivalent to taking our pharmaceutical SSRI, or antidepressant or anti-anxiety drugs. So we can just get out there and go for a walk in nature, or go for a little run, or get out there and do something physical to get our bodies moving. It has incredible impacts on our neurochemistry, on our brain. So we can change our brains without accessing antidepressants at all. So those are kind of like the basic building blocks of how I see health and wellness. And then we really can't be doing it all by ourselves. If we want to do that in isolation and live a solitary life, it'll probably be really hard to change and find our path to healing. We need people, we need friends, we need, you know, whoever we want to call family. It can be family of choice, but we need people in our lives to meaningfully connect with, because that's what's healing. You know, that's where our brains function at their optimal level, is if we are surrounded by meaningful relationships where we know that we have support, and where we actually have a place to offer and give support, that it is a bi-directionality in any relationship, that you feel connected with others, and then a sense of purpose and meaning, right? Where we're doing something to give back. We are helping our community by picking up trash, or we are doing beach cleanups, or we are taking young people to AA or NA meetings, or we're driving a neighbor who's a single mom's kids to school a couple times a week so she gets a morning off. Something where we feel like we have the opportunity to help support someone else other than ourselves. Those to me are like essential key ingredients to finding health and healing in our lives. So I think those are kind of important messages for me. You know, connecting with the land and nature is absolutely fundamental, I think, for so many of us. But there's other ways. If nature isn't your thing, there's other ways to find purpose and meaning and connection and your opportunity to give back. But it is about using your voice and putting yourself out there, being a little bit vulnerable, and looking for those ways that you feel like you're making a meaningful connection to other people as well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.